Scandals have existed forever and since the birth of the human being itself. They cause mistrust, and everyone wants to know about a conspiracy because of the thrill and the uncertainty it brings. And a good scandal is tempting to almost everyone, so here are some of the most expensive scandals of all time. Enron. Enron was a high-flying energy services company in the late 1990s. When it eventually collapsed, shareholders lost as much as $74 billion. The CEO and the CFO used an array of dubious accounting practices to inflate revenue and hide debts. The result was that the company appeared to be the most profitable in history when in fact it was saddled with debt. Most of the fraud was committed between 1998 and 2001, resulting in the stock price trading as high as $90.56. In 2001, the fraud became unsustainable and the company collapsed. Fasto and Skilling served 6 and 12 years in prison. Ken Lay died before he was sentenced. The scandal didn't only lead to the collapse of Enron. HHS Secretary Tom Price resigns after charter jet scandal. Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price had been taking expensive chartered flights for official business trips. USA Today reported that Price took 26 chartered flights to locations across the country, which cost an estimated $400,000. Price claimed he only used charters when commercial flights were not available, but as USA Today noted, it is not common for the HHS secretary to fly on private planes. Price's predecessors, Kathleen Sebelius and Sylvia Matthews Burwell, took commercial flights while holding the position. Price apologized for taking the private jet, saying he was not sensitive enough to my concern for the taxpayer, and promised to pay for his portion of the flights. The scandal ended up costing Price his job. He resigned shortly after the scandal came to public attention. WorldCom. In 2002, the company collapsed after wide-ranging accounting fraud was uncovered. Investors believed the stock was still a good investment. The company was valued at $180 billion. When auditors discovered that revenue and profits had been overstated by as much as $7 billion, the price quickly collapsed from $60 to $1. The company filed for bankruptcy. In 2006, WorldCom CEO Bernhard Ebers was sentenced to 25 years in prison. He was later released earlier this year after serving 15 years and died shortly thereafter. The WorldCom scandal resulted in nearly $180 billion in losses for investors and thousands of lost jobs. The diamond necklace hoax of 1785. It's been said that few creatures on this earth are more gullible than horny priests. That was certainly the case with Cardinal Prince de Rohan, who was so convinced that he was having an affair with Queen Marie Antoinette, that he arranged for her to purchase on her line of credit a diamond necklace worth $6 million. Unfortunately, Rohan was, unbeknownst to him, actually having an affair with a prostitute dressed up as the Queen, a ruse conducted by his former mistress, courtesan Countess Jeanne de la Motte, who hoped to make away with the necklace herself. When caught, de la Motte was sentenced to be stripped naked in public and branded with a hot iron. Charles Ponzi's Ponzi scheme. Charles Ponzi's scheme was by no means the biggest of financial scandals. Ponzi had a reputation as a con artist long before the scheme had made him famous. In 1919, Ponzi came up with a plan to trade international replies to coupons, IRCs. These are coupons that can be exchanged for postage stamps. He believed there was an opportunity to buy discounted IRCs in Europe, and then exchange them at face value in the United States. He raised money from investors, promising a 100% return within 90 days. Ponzi found that he could easily pay the promised returns to investors from new investors and that most reinvested the money in the scheme anyway. But the scheme collapsed within a year when a series of articles in the Boston Post caused investors to demand their money back. Ponzi ended up serving time in prison, but amazingly launched another scam as soon as he was released. Ponzi schemes and pyramid schemes are illegal in most countries. Bernie Madoff. In 2008, Bernie Madoff's hedge fund empire was exposed to be another Wall Street fraud. Madoff posted impressive but fictitious returns for his hedge funds. Supposedly, he was investing in blue chip shares and then engaging in portfolio hedging by buying options on the S&P 500. The fact that his funds appeared to generate steady returns with low volatility meant he had a steady flow of new capital flowing into them. Very few investors ever withdraw their money, so he was able to maintain the illusion for a long time. Eventually, in the wake of the 2008 global financial crisis, it became clear that the charade was about to collapse. In total, investors lost $64 billion. Though the money never really existed in the first place, Madoff was ultimately sentenced to 150 years in prison. Mississippi Bubble. France's economy was crippled by debt. They tried to resolve it by setting up a new bank that issued paper currency. One of the monopolies that law established was the Mississippi Company, which would consolidate the trading companies in Louisiana into one entity. Law was allowed to issue 50,000 shares, but investors only needed to put down a deposit equal to 15% of the share price. Investors flocked to buy shares, and Law was able to issue another 300,000 shares. Within months, the share price rose from 500 to 10,000. Law raised so much money that he was able to lend the French government enough money to pay off the national debt. The problem was that so much cash was required for investors to buy the shares that Law's bank had to print more money. When Law realized that both the currency and the share price were inflated, he tried to devalue both in a controlled manner. Unfortunately, this resulted in a selling frenzy, with investors trying to sell their shares and then exchange the currency for gold. In the end, the company collapsed and both the shares and France's currency became worthless. Widespread unrest followed, and Law, who had already been sacked, had to flee Paris and go into hiding. Wirecard. The recently uncovered fraud at Wirecard has turned out to be one of Europe's biggest financial scandals. Wirecard was a company that processed payments on behalf of merchants. At some point, the company began reporting fictitious revenue from these subsidiaries, which eventually accounted for the bulk of Wirecard's profits. When analysts, investors, and journalists questioned the lack of cash flow from the subsidiaries, Wirecard stated that the cash was all held in the subsidiary escrow accounts. When the media and several whistleblowers alleged the revenue did not exist, Wirecard accused them of trying to manipulate the share price for short sellers. Eventually, KPMG was asked to investigate and confirm that there was a hole in the balance sheet. It ultimately transpired that around $2 billion in liquid assets simply didn't exist. Within days, the share price collapsed from 100 euros to zero. Wirecard, which was worth $28 billion at one point, is now insolvent. This makes it one of Germany's and Europe's biggest financial fraud cases. 1MDB. In 2009, Malaysia's Prime Minister Najib Razak launched 1MDB as a strategic development company, which was owned by the Malaysian government. Amongst the investments was the company that produced the hit movie Wolf of Wall Street. In 2012 and 2013, Goldman Sachs helped 1MDB raise $6.5 billion by selling bonds. However, within 2 years, the company missed a loan payment, and it emerged that $700 million belonging to the company had found its way into Razak's bank account. In the wake of the unfolding scandal, Razak's party lost power for the first time in decades, and he and his wife attempted to flee the country. It has since emerged that as much as $4.5 billion were embezzled by key officials. Goldman Sachs agreed to a $3.9 billion settlement with the Malaysian government for its role in the fraud. 2008 Global Financial Crisis. Rating agencies were paid by issuers to give very risky securities investment-grade credit ratings. Mortgage originators encouraged homebuyers to exaggerate their assets and income to ensure mortgage applications were approved. They also used aggressive sales tactics to sell mortgages. Later, banks were found to be illegally foreclosing on properties. Banks sold securities to investors that they knew to be incredibly risky. In some cases, banks were short-selling the same securities they were promoting to fund managers. One of the big catalysts for the crisis was Lehman Brothers, which filed for bankruptcy when it could not be bailed out. So, which of these did you like the most? Let us know in the comment section. See you all in the next video.